And then following the presentation from Colm in the main room, everyone will get the option then of breakout room 1 or breakout room 2. Breakout room 1 will be with Louise Keane on the what to coach, and breakout room 2 will be with myself on the how to coach. So some people may have signed up previously and chosen the room, so you should go automatically to the room. And if there is any delays, Stuart is in the background here working on the breakout rooms, making sure that everybody is going to be allocated to their correct room following the main session with Colm. So we're delighted to have Colm Clear with us. Colm is the Leinster GAA Learning and Development Manager. He's a level 2 certified GAA coach, as well as being a qualified GAA tutor since 2010. And he's completed his master's research in the area of sports performance analysis. And he's been involved coaching with the Gaelic Games for up until the last 17 years. And that's from nursery right through to adult level. We're also delighted to be joined by Louise Keane. Louise is the Player Welfare and Inclusion Coordinator with the Camogie Association, having previously worked with Sligo as Games Development Administrator with a remit in performance, while also being a GDA with Leinster GAA. So we're delighted to have the two of them with us here this evening. So I'm going to hand you over to Colm, and Colm's going to get us going for the first part of the night. So over to you, Colm.
Thanks, Niall. I'm just going to share my screen here. Guys, just first of all, delighted to be with you this evening, and delighted that Niall asked me to be involved in this session. It's something that I would feel quite strongly about. It's something I'd have a passion for in that whole area of reflection. Sorry, I'm just going to have to move my screen around a little bit there. So just 1 second. Make sure it shares properly. I hope you can see that there. Can you see that there, Niall?
Yep, up there now.
Perfect. So as I was just saying, it's something that I'd be very passionate about in this area of reflective practice. And something I'm going to maybe just throw a few ideas, suggestions. I'm not going to say we've all the answers here tonight, but hopefully it'll get us thinking a little bit more about this area in particular. So just very, very quickly on your screen there, you'll see what we'd like to cover in this first 15, 20-minute section of tonight. So the overview and what we're going to cover is a sample process of reflective practice. Again, if you Google reflective practice, you'll see loads of different variations and options as what can be done. But tonight, we're just going to discuss one sort of sample that might pertain to camogie and camogie coaches in particular. The second thing is we're just going to consider is some of the things you've got to factor in when you are engaging in reflective practice that hopefully can improve your process and how you go about your reflective practice. And then the final piece will be examples of what that reflective practice can look like in reality. So for you in your coaching practice, what exactly it could look like. So we just move on. The first thing you've always got to ask yourself, no matter what you undertake, is why? What's the purpose of it? So we're just going to look here, first of all, at the reflective practice and why we possibly should engage with it. And here's a lovely quote I've come across a few years ago, and I think it really does sum it up. We do not learn from experiences. We actually learn from reflecting on those experiences. You do have the other saying, whereby if we have an experience and if we expect to improve and change, we've got to really, really reflect on where we are and what we're doing. So this concept that we learn by reflecting is hugely important. And that's the purpose. That's the why of what we're doing this evening. What I would say before we begin is I've no doubt, I think we've nearly 100 people on the call tonight, that every one of you already do have reflective practice as part of your coaching process. And it's just some of us might be more conscious and cognizant of it than others, but I would guarantee everybody does it in some way. So at the minimum level, what most of us will be doing is the simple version of plan, do, and review. That we look to our sessions, we'll put a plan together. Some of us will write that down. Others will do it in our head on the way to training, but we generally will put some form of plan together. The second element then is we deliver that coaching session. And then the final piece is we'll have a review of it. That could be, which is in your own thoughts, driving home in the car. That could be you as a few coaches getting together, the 2 or 3 of you that are coaching together, having a quick discussion at the end. It could be you picking up the phone to another coach that you know well and having a bit of a discussion with them, teasing out a few things that happened. So a lot of us are already doing that plan, do, and review process. What we're going to look to do here maybe is try to add a little bit more value and look at that in a little bit more detail and a couple of additional steps, and to be cognizant of them as we're doing them. So the first step is our reflection for practice. So that's actually reflecting to help us plan as part of our planning process. So a little example of that might be for, and again, I know we've mixed coaches from under 8 right up to senior teams on the call tonight. But if we take the example of a coach with an under 8 team, your reflection for practice could be something along the lines of you're working on ground striking with the girls, and you've decided, actually, look, we're progressing. You can see some development with them, and the distance they're now striking has improved. So that's your reflecting, having looked at what they're doing previously. It's one of the key skills you're looking to develop with the players. So now for the next coaching session, you decide we're going to have roughly a 20-meter distance in their striking to try and improve that a little bit further. So that's our reflection for planning based on the experience you've had. The next element then is the reflection in action. So what that is, you've planned to do that striking and you're looking for the distance of about 20 meters. But in reality, when you come to the session, you realize the girls are even better than you thought, and they're attacking the ball. They're moving to meet the ball as it's being struck to them. And suddenly your 20 meters becomes 15 meters. And they're now starting to push the ball rather than getting the full striking action. So you realize within the session, we're looking to get that longer striking. We're looking to get a proper full swing, and the distance we've had and the way we've set it out isn't working. So we're going to lengthen it, and we're going to lengthen it there and then and have that reflection in action to make that alteration live. The last piece then in this structure is your reflection on practice. So as the 2 or 3 coaches at the end, you decide, right, our striking was good. When we lengthened it, it did work, and that was an important alteration to make as part of that coaching session. But our reflection on action is that we're now going to have to look at the distances and how we set it up and potentially have it further the next time to ensure that we want the girls to attack the ball. We're not going to prevent them doing that. So let's lengthen it even further the next time. And then that feeds back into your planning for the next time and keeps that loop going. So that's a sort of simple example of the structure of the plan, do, review, but now adding in and be cognizant of our reflection for action, our reflection in action, and our reflection on action, and how they can be easily built into your process. The next thing we're going to look at is trying to maybe some small little things we can do to maximize the reflection process. And the one thing here that is important is that if we reflect on our own, we can be directed by our own thoughts, and we can struggle maybe to think differently, because this is the way we're used to doing it. This is the way we've always done it. And having another person as part of your reflection process can help you think differently. So one thing we would recommend is that you actually reflect together. And as a coaching team, where possible, try to come together and do it as part of a group rather than on your own. Now, I'm not saying there's no benefit in reflecting on your own. There's huge benefit in doing that too. But if we want to really maximize it and get us to think differently and maybe ask ourselves questions and look at it in a way that we haven't before, then reflecting together can be hugely beneficial. So that's something to consider. Now, with that becomes the few pitfalls. That when we do start getting together, maybe 2 or 3 of us to plan a session, or alternatively to review a session at the end, what happens is we come with different opinions, we come with different ideas, we've been looking at different elements of the session, and we can end up, that discussion can end up going down multi directions and can end up being a bit disjointed. And in reality, I think we can all put our hands up and say we probably end up reflected on logistics. Who was at the training? When's the next session? And we sometimes move away from reflecting on our actual coaching practices. So one of the tools to do that and to aid and try and keep us is to try and have a structured reflection built into our coaching practice. So tonight we're going to look at 2 areas that we've shared with you already and mentioned to you as part of this session. And we'll just use them as examples in order to try and structure our reflection. So the first one there, and this is the one that Niall will lead on the room in the breakout room, is the how you coach. So this is really focusing on you, the skills, the qualities that you bring as a coach and how you're coaching. So one of the tools we have to help us reflect on that and give a structure to our reflection is the 6 how-to coach areas. A lot of you who've done the foundation course, the Camogie courses, and the level 1, you'll have come across these 6 how-to coach areas. So we can use them as a template to give a bit of structure to our reflection. So within them, we've got our build rapport, we've got our explain, we've got our observe, we've got our analyze, we've got our feedback, and our demonstration. So we have those areas that we can reflect on. And I'm going to just talk us through an example, a practical example of one of them. And as I said, Niall will talk through the other 5 as part of the breakout room that he's at. So the first one here is the build rapport. And if we're going to reflect on that, and if you look at point 4 there on the sheet, coach the person rather than just the player. So if that was the area we decided as a coaching team that we're going to reflect for our practice. So we're going to have a reflection for our practice. It's an area we want to do. So if I was involved with say an under maybe 14 or under 16 Camogie team, one of the things that the coaching group might decide is that we want to try and have a brief one-to-one conversation with all players as our next session. So we're going to build that into our planning. We've decided as a group, we'd like to get to know the players a bit better, and we want to increase the rapport we have with them. So we're going to aim to get a one-to-one conversation with all players at our next session. To do that, we're going to get to the session a half an hour early, have the activity set up within 10 to 15 minutes, and we'll have 15 minutes that we'll be there waiting for the girls to arrive. And as they're poking around at the start, doing a little bit of a warm-up themselves, we'll get to try and have these discussions with them. What could happen then in reality is a reflection in practice. When we started having these one-to-one conversations, the girls perhaps opened up a bit more, the conversation flowed, and within that 15 minutes before we wanted to start the session, we don't get around to everybody. So our decision then in practice is actually, do you know what? We're going to get the session started at 6:30, like we said. We haven't got around to everybody, but we are going to start the session because we don't want it to be rushed where we're actually not listening to them and we're moving on to conversations. So we'll have the conversations with those that we're talking to. We won't get to everyone. We'll accept that. And at 6:30, we'll still start the session. So then we come back and a reflection on practice is we decided it was great to talk to all the girls one-to-one that we did get to talk to. We felt they opened up more than we ever anticipated. The conversation was flowing with the couple that we did. But what we now need to do is we want to continue having that element of one-to-one with the girls in advance of the training, but we've got to make sure we get to everybody. So over the next 2 sessions, we're going to make sure we get a one-to-one conversation with each of the girls talking about something that might be Camogie relevant or might actually just be their schooling, the other sports they're playing, whatever that might be, to build that bit of a connection. But as a plan, what we've got to ensure is that we keep note individually of what players we spoke to each night, and over 3 sessions ensure that we get to everybody. So that's our learning and a reflection on practice. And again, that feeds back into the loop of reflection for practice. Which are the girls in particular I'm going to try and ensure I get a one-to-one session with the next time. So that's how a template could have a huge impact on assisting us and giving us a structure to our reflection. So that's an example of how you coach. The next area we're going to look at tonight in the other breakout room, and again, the recordings of both breakout rooms will be shared with everybody, is the what you coach. So one template we would use in Leinster with a lot of our games development staff or GPOs and GDAs is what we have as the Taurus Principles. So again, Louise is going to give examples of a couple of these, but I'm just going to take one just to discuss here in the main room. And again, I'll try and put it to a very practical example. So the Taurus Principles, it's based on the Irish word Taurus, which is journey, a coach's journey. And what this relates is it's sort of a structure and a reflective tool in order to review the activities we're doing as part of our coaching sessions. So the example I'm going to give here is the S, is the final one on it. And that stands for should always be enjoyable, developmentally appropriate, and a holistic GA experience. On this reflection tool, as you can see, we have a few bullet points. They're not questions you have to answer. They're just sort of prompts to get you thinking about this area. But if we look at the 3rd bullet point there, did you develop the person as well as the player through the activities you're doing in the session? So we'll take that as the example for this group. So I'm looking at a scenario here of maybe an under 18, a minor team, where we're looking to develop leadership within the players. And this is something we've noticed from the last couple of games, that in tight games, we find that the girls go very, very quiet, that there's no one really standing up and trying to take ownership and a bit of leadership on the pitch. And likewise, whenever things happen on the pitch, they look to the line a good bit, they look to the coaches for decisions, to problem solve for them, rather than them maybe taking a bit of ownership and problem solving on the pitch first. So with that in mind, this is something we've reflected on, and as part of our reflection for practice, we're going to look at building some problem solving into our session. A simple example of that, again, if we deal in reality, you might be lucky to have 16, 18 players. Not many will have 30 at a training session based on numbers, etc. So we've 18 players planned to be at the session, and we're actually going to have a game of backs and forwards within our session. Now, the game of backs and forwards is going to last for nine plays of the ball, so 9 balls to begin with, and we'll see what score the forwards can get against the defence. After that, those 9 balls are played, we're going to separate the backs and the forwards, and we're going to ask them to have a conversation separately as to what they can do to improve their score. So if the forwards, they have to have a discussion to see how they can get more scores than what they got in the first 9, and the defenders are going to have a conversation to decide how they're going to prevent conceding what they scored in the first game. So that's our plan. We give them 4 minutes, and then we get them back in another 9 balls and see how they go. So we plan on doing 3 iterations of that within the game. So there'll be 2 opportunities for the backs and forwards to have a discussion and to figure out a way to improve their effectiveness in the game. Reflection in practice, what could happen, and more than likely will, is that when we'll take the example of the forwards. When we put the forwards together, there's a bit of quietness. This is the first time they've done it. So now we realize that a lot of the conversation as coaches, we are standing back and watching. A lot of conversation is about working harder. We need to be more accurate in our shooting, etc. So we leave that play out for the 3-4 minutes and then let the girls back off again. As a coaching team, we come together very quickly and say, right, conversation started, but wasn't really focusing on tangible things to do that they could implement within the next 9 plays of the ball. So what we've decided to do in practice, or reflection in practice, is to use a few prompt questions. So when they come out for the next break, we're going to have 2 prompt questions for the forwards and maybe 2 prompt questions for the backs to get them thinking and maybe align more where we're looking to go. So as the forwards come out in the next one, the 2 prompt questions we might use is, for example, as simple as, okay, girls, where do we need to create space to get more scores, and how are you going to create that space? And then stand back and leave them have the conversation and let them figure it out. So we do that for the second time, and they play out the game for the third element, for the third phase of that play. Our reflection on practice, because again, as coaches, we now have a template, we're following a structure. This is what we're going to discuss at the end. And we've realized that actually, you know what, giving them an opportunity to discuss. We've seen a couple of the girls taking a bit of a leadership role. That was good. We found that the conversations were much better when we had the prompt questions. So going forward for the next couple of sessions, for those problem solving scenarios, we'll prepare a few prompt questions to help speed things up over time. Hopefully we'll be able to take out those prompt questions because the girls will take more ownership. But we feel for the next couple of sessions, have prompt questions for those problem solving. But most importantly, we're going to continue to have those problem solving elements built into the session because we've seen an impact from it. The next element is those 3 or 4 girls. We have to think about this, and we might reflect on this before we reflect for our next practice and do our plan. Will we wait a little bit longer to see if those 3 or 4 continue to show promise and take ownership and be those leaders that are standing out? And if they do continue to be that, what additional tasks or what other challenges can we give them to develop them even further as leaders on the team and to challenge them as individuals and as people in order to improve even further in their leadership skills? So that's just, again, another sort of practical example of how this whole process of reflection for practice, reflection in practice, and reflection on practice can work and is built in within our coaching sessions. And having that structure to it, whether as a group we decide we're going to focus on reflecting on how we coach, or we have a look maybe at on what we're coaching. But having that tool can be a huge asset to keep the language and keep the discussions on point for us as a coaching team, and keep us focused on reflecting on our coaching practices and processes. So that's that initial.
Those principles are relevant. Okay, so we can use that template then to reflect on our coaching, and I suppose as a bit of a checklist to see how we're doing at delivering those principles within our sessions. So we're going to go through each of those the 4 principles that Colm didn't go through to show how we can use this to reflect and practice. Okay, so each principle along the side here has 3 example questions laid out. These are, as Colm said, prompt questions. They're just there to guide us, and they're not the only questions we can use. So don't be afraid to be curious with it. You know, ask other questions, see what other prompts you can use within your coaching. So if we look at what the principle might look like in practice when we're using it to reflect. So let's say I've reflected on the last game and I've picked up that we need to work on striking on our non-dominant side. Okay, so that's going to be the focus of the session. So I plan my session. We have some technique work on our striking. We do maybe a little bit of conditioning in there as well. And then the main part of my session is a 3-on-3 small-sided game. So I set up a square around the 45 and we do 3-on-3 within that square. And then on the whistle, the team who have the ball have to create some space. They can break out of the square. They have to create some space and strike the ball off their non-dominant side into one of 2 large squares that are set up, we'll say on the opposite 21. Okay. If they get the ball into the square, they get 2 points, but it has to be off their non-dominant side. Okay, so that's my plan, and I go into my session. We work through that, and now I'm in the session. I'm letting this play, but I'm noticing with my coaches that teams are struggling to get scores. Okay, so it's quite challenging, and maybe the challenge is too hard. And I've got players that are maybe getting distracted because of the challenge being too hard. So when they're waiting to take their turn, they're distracted, they're not paying attention. So as coaches, we decide, right, we'll change the scoring. So they can now strike off their dominant or non-dominant side. Okay, so it's a bit more applicable to a game. And they get 1 point if they score off their dominant side, but still 2 if they score off their non-dominant side. Okay, so I'm reflecting in session with my coaches, and we're making a change to make sure that all players are being challenged and that we're keeping them engaged through this as well. Okay. Then after the session, we reflect further on the session. Okay, so we reflect on our action. So we notice that through that, looking at our prompts, we've actually noticed that we're only commenting when they score. So even though they may have made a really good strike off their non-dominant side, it's not gone into the square, so they haven't got points, and we're actually not giving them feedback on that, even though what they have done is good, the effort is really good, they're just not getting the outcome of the score. So we're noticing that we're not commenting on that. So that then becomes our part of our reflection on what we need to do within the next session. So we need to make sure that we're giving feedback, we're recognizing that what they're doing is really good in terms of effort, but the outcome is not the overall focus. So that then feeds back into our plan and our reflection for action for our next session. Okay, hopefully that makes sense.
Louise, I think that's a brilliant example. And when I started using this tool as well in my own coaching practice, that was a huge one. As a coaching team, we realized whenever there was shots, we always really, applauded, and we clapped, especially in games when there was a score or whatever else. And actually in the training, we were trying to promote using the non-dominant side. where in reality we nearly had to make it, we decided we were going to make a bigger deal out of a player trying under non-dominant and not succeeding than a player succeeding under dominant, because that's what we wanted to encourage and make them want to try it, especially at the underage age groups, because that's what you're looking for them, is to try and practice and have a goal. If it doesn't work out, so be it, and really, really make a big deal out of it. Give them as much praise for striking perhaps under left and missing it as you would for striking on the right and scoring. So make an effort out of that, and having a tool like this helps us reflect on that.
Yeah, and definitely I think as well, like that little bit of praise from a coach, that type of thing lights a player up. It's something that they remember, you know, that could be the thing they remember going out of the session. So that individual praise is really important as well. Perfect. So we'll go on to the second one here, and we'll apply the same for this principle. So the second principle is understanding that the player is at the center of the game and provides individualized development. So it's player centered. So again, in practice, then we'll say we've reflected on the last game or the last session, and this time we're realizing that high fielding and blocking are two things that we really need to work on. So that's going to be the focus of the session, and that's my reflection for action. So I plan out my session based off of that. In session then, and my reflection in action. So during the game part of that session, that say I have conditions within the game for high fielding and for blocking. I'm noticing that a couple of players are overpowering some of the other players, and they're getting most of the scores and kind of controlling the game quite a lot. So we're recognizing this within the game. We're taking a break, giving players a chance to catch their breath and maybe grab a water or whatever. And we decide we're going to give the players the condition that they can, so the couple of dominant players on either team, that they can continue to score, but we want them to get each of their forwards to score as well. Okay, so we're giving them more of a leadership role. It doesn't stop them from scoring, so we're not limiting them from scoring, but we're giving them the role that helps other players and hopefully empowers them as well in doing that. So we let that play on, and then after the session, we're going to review and reflect on the action. So looking back, then we might look at our pairings. Okay, so they are maybe working really well in the blocking activity that we're doing. But then when we go on to the high catch activity, we realized that actually there was a few major height differences, and that really affected the effectiveness of that part of the session. So we plan out that for the next session, we will have our pairings done out beforehand. We'll make sure our pairings are right for the blocking session part of the session. We'll change the pairings where necessary for the high catch to make sure that they're right for that. But we have it planned out beforehand. We have the names on a list, so it's easy for us to do really quickly and effectively without taking too much time out of our session. Okay. So if you look at the questions along the side, I'm using them as prompt questions here to make sure that I'm reflecting on what I'm doing as a coach, to look for improvements in my coaching. I think Colm mentioned it before, but something we can get caught on is either reflecting on kind of the things that are around the outside, how many is attending training, that type of thing, or we can get caught on reflecting on what the players are doing as opposed to what the coaches are doing and the coaching within the session. So it's just important to bring us back to that, make sure we're reflecting on the coaching and how we can improve that to improve the session. So third principle then is resembles the game. So things are game based. So my plan, which again comes from maybe my last session or the last game. For this session, it might be the players were bunching a lot and getting drawn together in the last game. So we want to focus the session on keeping width and creating space. So I plan my session. One of the main activities is a full game but with 2 lines of cones down the middle of the pitch. So I have 3 grids. Okay, so a grid on the left hand side, a grid down the middle, and a grid on the right hand side. And players have to stay within their grid. So that's what I'm using to help keep with and help them create space through the session. So we go through our session. In the session, then for my in session and my reflection in action, as coaches, we notice that there's a need for some players to be able to move through the grids to keep the game flowing. That, you know, if they're all staying in the necessary grids, then it can disrupt maybe the flow of the session a little bit. So we've decided then that maybe 2 players can move through the grids at any one time. Okay, so this is also then going to encourage them to communicate and to scan the play, because it could be any players at any given time. Okay, so by making the change within the session, it's going to develop the game, the activity that they're doing, and it's adding to the challenge and hopefully the development then of the players as well. Maybe then, and something that's happened to me recently in doing an activity very similar to this, is having a player ask towards the end why they can't just move across the grids when the slitter's over the other side of the field. So if they're on a grid on the left hand side and the slitter's on the right, why can't they move across? So from this question, it kind of made me realize that actually the players aren't seeing or aren't understanding exactly why we're doing what we're doing. So they know what to do, but they just don't know maybe why they're actually doing it. So even though we're explaining the what and the why at the start, their understanding isn't fully there. So from that, what I realized was from the next session on, what I needed to do was make sure that I was checking for understanding. And I probably thought I was doing that by just asking if they understand, as opposed to actually getting them to feedback what they understood. So asking them what their understanding of why we're doing it is, and maybe even asking them that before we explain the why, because usually what you find is the players themselves, they generally have the answers. Maybe as coaches, we're just not giving them credit for it. So it's making sure that they're tuned into not just how to do it, but why we're doing it as well. And hopefully that's going to improve the motivation and the engagement side of things too.
Louise, I might just come in there. I think that's a really powerful point, that in a lot of times as coaches, and again, this reflection tool, I suppose, helped me in that journey as well, was we do spend a lot of time on what we're doing and how to do it when we're given our instructions. So this is what we're doing and this is how you do it. But the why can be left out, but it's critical. It's hugely important for them to understand why they're doing it to get that engagement. So what you went through there, Louise, I think is a big learning that we all could take as part of our reflection, is do we, and even for you guys, maybe after this call, think back on it, your last sessions, I know it might be a few weeks ago, but how good are we explaining to the girls, to the players, why they're doing each of the activities? We'll know it as coaches because we'll have planned and thought about it, but do they know why? And are we good at that? And some of you will be brilliant at doing that. Others, it's something that we can get better on. So I think that was a brilliant point, Louise, and just really worth highlighting.
Perfect. Thanks, Colm. And again, that just feeds back into the next session on adding that in. You know, I'm planning ahead of time that I'm going to add that into my session, my next session, but, you know, maybe all my sessions as well. The last principle then we'll go through is all players involved all of the time. So lots of touches and lots of decisions. So let's take that last session that I've just kind of gone through as an example, and from that session, and when I'm planning for the next one, I'm noticing that, you know, the game that we're playing is a full game, so all the players are involved, however many that is I have on my session, and I've only one slitter, so they're not getting lots of touches. They're probably getting minimal touches, for some players means less decisions, and less involved in the activity. So I plan then the session based off this for the next session, And this time I still want it to be about creating space and creating width. But this time I'm going to plan for small-sided games so that there's more touches and more decisions. So I plan for, we'll say 5v5, but in a large square instead of using a whole pitch, okay? And I use conditions within that small-sided game to help with the width and help with the creating space. So in session then, when we're going through these small-sided games, I'm maybe realizing that some teams are dominating over others. So what can I do in that situation? I maybe even out the teams, and I change the condition slightly. So maybe now every player within the 5-person team has to touch the slitter in order to score. Okay, so I'm able to alter it within the session to make sure that we're achieving what we want to. And then post session, when we reflect and look at how much of the session, so again, I'm using one of my questions here as a prompt, how much of the session was made up of games. Maybe I'm looking at it and it's only 25% of the session or 20% of the session, but I noticed that with the small-sided games, players are getting a lot more touches, they're making a lot more decisions, and they're getting a much more conditioning elements to the session as well. So they're getting a lot more energy expenditure from doing the session. So we decide then for the next session, going back into my planning, so completing the circle again, that, okay, we're going to use our small-sided games for longer, but I'm going to use different small-sided games. So I might change the conditions to focus on different things. I might change the size of the square, change how many players are involved. And hopefully then, you know, that's working on improving that session for the next session. So that kind of takes us through, I suppose, what reflection looks like when we're planning, when we're coaching, and when we're reviewing a session. And hopefully it gives you an idea of how we can use reflection to help with what we're actually coaching. So I suppose a few key takeaways, hopefully as well, it's given you an insight into how we can use Taurus as a template for that reflection. But to give you, we're about 2 minutes left. So to give you 3 kind of key takeaways going away, I suppose the first one is that reflection is not just for after. So it's part of the process throughout. So we have a reflection for action, a reflection in action, and a reflection on action. So that's probably one of the main things to kind of take away. Also, Taurus and its principles. Okay, so they're providing us a really effective template to use for reflection. But important to remember that the questions, they're just prompts, so you don't have to use all of them, but the list also isn't exhaustive. So make sure that you're getting curious about what questions you can ask to prompt yourself and your coaches around those principles. And the final one, to keep pulling yourself back, I suppose that this is reflection on the coaching and not just the player's performance or the environment that we're in. So that's our 3 key kind of takeaways. Hopefully that's made sense for us all. If you have any questions, or Colm, if you want to jump in on anything.
Yeah, no,
50 seconds.
I think that was excellent, Louise, and a good summary on it. And the final point you made is the reflection at times when we look at the players and the activities and stuff, and we can end up sort of reflecting on why are they doing it wrong, or what do they need to change. But the first part of reflection should be, what could I do differently? What could I do to improve this? How could I change this? So very, very quickly, the example of players bunching, you know, maybe if you change the activity rather than telling them to separate, by altering the activity, you can get the activity to make them find space. Maybe activity is making them bunch. So what can you do to change the activity? So they're little examples. And again, we'll go back out into the main room now. And if there's any questions, if you want to put it into the chat, and hopefully we'll be able to answer them. I think we're just done. Louise, perfect timing.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thanks very much for joining us in this breakout room on reflective practice on the how to coach skills. Over the next few minutes, we're going to run through each of the how to coach skills and give you, the coach, tips and tricks and questions that you can consider while you're reflecting on your own coaching practice on the how to coach skills. The first one up here is we have explain. So when you're reflecting or even in preparation to explaining, are you running through the explanation in your head before giving it to your players? This can be done on the way to training or on the way to a match, or maybe when you're laying out the exercise that you're getting ready for as the players are arriving in, or if they're getting ready for another exercise. Did you focus on a few specific points? Did you concentrate on the what to do rather than the what not to do? And in your explanation, not only what to do, but also the how and the why. I find when you explain the how and the why and the rationale around what you're doing, this does generate and create buy-in from players. Did you or can you create mental pictures and use language that players can remember easily? These mental pictures could be something that a game may have been on at the weekend, and you can ask the players, did you see in the Camogie semi-final last weekend when Coach Devan had the ball and she done such a skill? That's given those players the mental picture around what you're trying to explain. Is your body language good when explaining? So what way is your body language when you're explaining? And after explaining, question the player or players to check for understanding. So even though you might think in your own head that you explained it exceptionally well, and there should be understanding, it's very important to check to ensure that the players have understood. Not all players will nod and agree and say, yeah, they do understand, but then when the activity is up and running, you might then be able to have that one-on-one conversation with the player before they get into the activity and ask them, did you understand there? Because they mightn't necessarily want to speak up in a group. Demonstration as a how to coach skill is something that commonly comes up in any of the formal education courses. Some coaches might feel that they mightn't have the technical skills to be able to demonstrate the skill. But outside of that, for the demonstrations and reflecting on the demonstration, you're asking yourself the questions, could all players see the demonstration? Was it the best angle or position for seeing the required elements from all players? You can ask yourself, did the players need to see the full skill or only a segment of it? Could the demonstration be aided by using certain cues or imagery? Again, you could have a picture of the skill in screenshotted or on a page there, showing them exactly what best practice looks like when in this skill, and they can visually see what you're trying to demonstrate. And very important was the demonstration pitched at the right level of difficulty for your players? When we're observing, coaches observe players consistently, both in training and in matches. You might be observing them in the technical or the tactical elements of the game. You could be observing them in their body language. You could be observing them with their teammates around. And high quality observation requires high quality preparation. So us as coaches should be and are more than likely constantly observing what exactly is going on. And as outlined there, coaches systematically gathers appropriate sensory information about performance primarily through vision. But there is in certain cases, information can be also gained from certain sounds. So if you hear a good strike of a summer's evening and the ball going off the hurl, you can hear the sound of the ball moving around the pitch. If there's a few balls going in a different activity, you mightn't necessarily be able to see everything that's going on, but you can hear everything that's going on. An observational skill of observation needs loads of practice. We've seen some coaches themselves where they observe different games and different trainings of other teams playing and other teams' training sessions. And they're going out there with a coach and the both of them are observing the same game or training, and then they're having conversations about what they observed. And sometimes it's interesting to see what the commonalities were in what they're observing, while also seeing some of the differences and learning off each other. And these can happen in informal conversations over the course of a season throughout the year. Like observation, to analyze, it needs practice. And what are we analyzing? So again, we're looking to analyze in your head exactly what is good practice. And when you're analyzing, you're then deciding whether to reinforce or modify, or take note, but take no immediate action. So this can happen during training or in matches. You could be analysing the activity that's going on, you let it run for a few minutes, but then when you call them in, that's when you take the action. Same in matches. You could be analysing your own team, you could be analysing what the opposition team is doing. And you're trying to figure out then, is there something we can do now? Or do we wait? Or do we do something later on? And again, analysis is becoming huge across all sports. Performance analysis, player analysis, team analysis. And again, it's being able to take all that information on board, analyze it, break it down, and see where that fits for the team that you're working with. And similarly to the observational skills, you could work with a different coach, work with an assistant coach, or if you're a group of coaches working together, analysing information, reading it together, seeing is there a common understanding of what you're analysing, and then being able to bring it into your coaching practice. And finally then, feedback. So feedback is where you're given information about a player or players or the team to improve team performance. This feedback allows players to recognise good current performances and create references for improving future ones. Effective feedback considers multiple factors. When to give it to the person or the team, where to give the feedback. Is it before training, before a match, during a match, after a match? All these factors have to be taken into consideration. When you're given feedback, it's very important to prepare the question. Present the question. And don't be afraid to encourage players' responses. And then for you as a coach to process the player's response. This can open conversations in relation to feedback, and it gets a good understanding for you as a coach and for the player. An example of this could be you could be giving feedback to a particular player who is playing from behind. She's a defender and she's marking from behind. You could be giving feedback to Eileen and saying, Eileen, we need you shoulder to shoulder. Let's be touch tight. Eileen then, for instance, could come back and say that she's aware that the player that she's marking is faster than her. So she prefers the player from behind rather than be beaten to the ball in a foot race where she's easier turned. Where she'd feel that from playing from behind or a yard behind, that if she does get the ball, she's there to stand her up. In this instance, the feedback that the coach has given has encouraged a response from the player, and then a conversation starts then around what's best then in this situation. And that feedback is worked with the player and the coach. And there is going to be a lot more learning in that instance, instead of just giving the feedback as a coach and the player just nodding their head saying, okay, where that player might have rationale to why she was doing what she was doing. The sandwich technique is common in the sense of you give some positive information or positive feedback to the player, then you might come in with a critique and finish off with a positive again. Where this technique is effective is acknowledged, but this technique may be only effective in specific circumstances. It can also undermine the value of your feedback if the player figures out what you were trying to do and then shuts it down. So you knowing your player, understanding them, and understanding the type of feedback that they need to receive, you yourself as a coach is able to develop those skills to read those situations. And again, like all the other information on the how to coach skills, what we've outlined here are just some tips and tricks and some reflective questions that you can ask yourself when you're looking at the how to coach skills. You might necessarily need to look at them, all 6 of them, at the one time. You might decide, well, for the next few weeks, I'm going to work on my feedback. How can I improve, develop, and reflect on what I'm doing to make me improve in this area? A few weeks down the road, my observational skills, maybe I can look to improve them. I might go watch another session, another team play, have a conversation with that coach, and have a coaching conversation about observation. So guys, I hope everybody got something from it. Again, as outlined, thanks very much for coming into this breakout room, and I hope you enjoyed.
But yeah, this is your time. If you've got any questions, fire them through in the chat box now. We'll give it the awkward kind of 15 seconds, and then if no one types in, we'll wrap it up. There we go. Okay, well done, Paul. We got a question. Right, gents and ladies, in terms of providing feedback, how important is the role of the parent, particularly in young players? Who's taking that one first? Colm's right in front of me, so Colm,
yeah,
take that one first.
I can take that one. It's a fantastic question, Paul. It's one of those that actually, when we talk about feedback and we also talk about reflection, it's one of those that I'd be adamant that we say, if we're using the likes of, I don't know which group you were in, but if you were with the likes of the Taurus Principles or even the 6 how-to coach, I know this puts ourselves as coaches on the spot a little bit, but I'd be sharing that with the parents and saying, these are what we're looking to do and this is what we're looking to achieve in a very simple way, and this is how we're reflecting. So they have a better understanding then of things that you're trying to promote, the fact that you're trying to recognize effort rather than talent and things like that. So they can be part of that conversation. And I've seen it happen with some really, really progressive teams where they bring in the parents and the conversations around them, as in, what's the first thing you ask the kid when they get in the car after a game? Is it, did you win the match? Did you score? Or the questions you're asking, well, how did you get on today? Did you enjoy it? What did you learn today? And starting with questions like that, and they can have a huge impact as part of that feedback. And they can help you in your reflection. The one thing we haven't mentioned tonight, and I think it's something we should have, is that as part of your reflection process, you can include the players. You can have them as part of the discussions. And likewise, parents can be a huge asset to the reflection. You know, what are the girls saying at home? Are they enjoying training? What are they finding challenging? We talked about the test and challenging. You know, what do they find enjoyable? What do they find testing? Are they finding the sessions too hard, too easy? And they might chat that to the parents and not to you as coaches. So keeping them in the loop and part of that whole coaching process. You've got them for maybe 2 hours a week. The parents are with them for every, you know, for larger amounts of that time. So they can be a huge asset as part of it. So Niall or Louise, do you want to add anything on that one?
No, I think definitely working with the parents as coaches is probably something that definitely needs to be part of what the coach does or what the club does. So letting them know what you're working on, why you're doing it, and giving them that understanding of what's going on, I think is very important. And even parents understanding what their role is within the setup, and even asking those type of questions. How did the game go? Or, for parents to be asking the correct type of questions is key. But there is I just put it in the text box there. There is a website there working with parents in sport. It's a UK. In the UK, they have a lot of resources and tips and things for coaches of how best to work with parents in sport. So there might be something there for somebody to have a look at it.
Nice one, folks. So a really quick one about the foundation courses. There are foundation courses will be coming out next year. So speak to your club secretary, because that would have gone out to the club secretary for foundation courses for next year. So they'll start in February. Next question was, and we'll give Louise this one, looks a little bit of a player welfare one. How to deal with a coach that you're helping that has a gripe with a parent and takes it out on the player. So if I understand that correctly, the coach doesn't like the parent and they're taking it out on the child of the parent. How do you deal with that as a fellow coach or mentor? Louise, you're up.
Thanks, Stuart.
You don't mean that.
That is, I suppose that's a tricky one, isn't it? And I think somebody actually put into the group there that, it's all about communication, and I suppose it really is all about communication when it comes to that as well. And the communication between the parent and the coach, first and foremost, I suppose. Obviously, coaches, we would hope that they aren't, taking anything out on any players, from outside situations. But I think the relationship between coaches and parents is huge. I think as coaches, we're sometimes guilty of calling them our players, but at the end of the day, they're their parents' children, first and foremost. So building that relationship, from a parental side, building that relationship with the coach, and from the coach's side, building the relationship with the parents. And what I suppose Colm touched on, having if it's a meeting at the start of the year where you're explaining as a coach what the ethos of what you're trying to do with the players is, so that those lines of communication are open, and so that parents are able to approach the coaches and have conversations just the same way that you're doing with your players, and hopefully you build a strong enough relationship that you can have, at times, if it's a hard conversation with the coaches, then hard conversations, but that relationship, I think, is always key to that.
Super, thank you, Louise. Niall,
on that one, and just look, first of all, and I think this needs to be said, if it's something that is a child protection thing that needs to be dealt with, you've got the children's officer in the club and get advice, and it needs to be dealt with in that. But if it's a small thing, little things and subtle little things, I think a key thing here would be when you speak with the other coach, but depersonalize it in the sense that make them aware of their behaviors. So it's not about them as a person, it's their behaviors and those little things that they might be doing that they don't even realize, and just call out the behaviors and what they're doing with them. If it's small little things that is happening subconsciously, if it's anything more than that, then there is the process and you follow the child protection guidelines and what needs to be done in relation to that. That'd just be my tuppence worth on that one.
Super, thanks, folks. Niall, you're up for this one. So it was kind of a working around about how to set up the reflection process in general. So coaches tend to be all busy; they just want to kind of finish the session and get home. How do you manage it practically? As in, do they have a text group where they do it? Is there a template to fill out? How would you actually go about a group of coaches reflecting after a session?
Yeah, look, I think getting it started is probably the biggest thing, and an understanding so that the coaches know that they are going to put time into reflecting on what they're actually doing as a group with their team. Maybe the initial conversation around what that looks like comes from the group, that if they're able to come up with an agreement of, okay, we'll review one session a week, we'll review one game a week, and this is how we do it. So, you know, there's a lot of community of practices out there now, and a community practice, say in relation to coaching, is that they kind of set up their own terms and an agreement of what is best going to work for them. And that could be something as simple as having a WhatsApp group. It could be having just a Microsoft form there that they fill out after matches, just saying how the match went and things like that, and maybe one of the lead coaches doing that. Or it could be as easy as something as using the Taurus worksheet there that Colm has, and maybe coaches deciding one of the weeks they're all going to fill that out, and it just becomes part of their process. But again, the initial conversation of what the reflect and practice looks like for the group, that probably has to be agreed with the group themselves. And then I think when they've kind of all agreed on it, they're more likely then to buy into it, rather than one person or saying, well, we need to do this or we need to do that. I think it's finding the balance that suits everyone.
Lovely. Thanks, Tyler. So was there anything else from Colm and Louise? If not, there's one more question.
Yeah, just on Niall's point there, and I think you've got to be realistic. Time is the challenge to this reflective practice, and having the time to do it, and be smart, be what's realistic for the group. It might be you're going to, if you do 2 sessions a week, you're going to every second session, the one on the Thursday evening or whatever it is, you're going to give 15 minutes at the end where you're going to just focus and reflect using maybe a template or a tool that you have. And that's the reflection piece. Reviewing, whoever's planning the session, they might take on ownership or responsibility of the reflection for action, and the conversations you're having within the session, instead of maybe when you do get together getting distracted and chatting about other things, you use those opportunities when you come together to put a little bit more focus and ownership on that reflection in practice. So it's about building it in small, subtle ways, rather than thinking it's going to be a big burden. So make it realistic and try and achieve it then.
Thanks for that, Colm. And then one last one, folks. Thanks again for the questions. They were very good. There's a couple of bits of advice in the chat as well there. So if you want to click on that, you can see a couple of suggestions people have put forward. Colm, last question for you. How do you encourage players to reflect? So we're going about coaches. Any quick tips on how you get the players to do it?
And I think there's the easiest way is questioning. We've ultimately just got to ask good, pertinent, open questions in order to get them to reflect. And that's what we've got to do as coaches. And that can again be for action, in action, and on action. So that can be about, right, if this scenario happens again, what could you do? So if you face that situation again, so that's your reflection for action. You've got it within a game, within a session, within a training session. Okay, what are you going to do now that you're facing this? And see, do they adapt? And then having that little brief conversation at the end of, what's the I don't know, 2 stars and a wish or 3 stars and a wish, what you're really happy with about your game, and what's the one thing you'd like to improve for the next time. So it could be, it's our ability to pose questions, I think, to the players and get them thinking. That'd be my view on it anyway.
Thanks very much, Colm. Okay, so we'll just do a quick sum up from the presenters. So Louise, Niall, anything you want to finish off with? We'll go Louise first.
I think probably the biggest take home from my point of view would be that, our reflection isn't just at the end of our session, that we're doing our reflection in our planning, we're doing our reflection in our action, and we're doing our reflection then in that review part as well. So it becomes part of the whole process as opposed to just the end of the process. That'd be my key takeaway, I suppose.
Superb. We'll go. Colm, any last words to finish off?
Just something that Louise mentioned in the room we were in, the real, what you should really focus on as part of your reflection is you. What can you control and what you can action? So it's reflection on your behaviors and what you can influence within the session. Now, again, that does involve looking at the players and what their behaviors are, etc. But it's what you can do in order to change that. So reflect on yourself rather than reflecting on others.
Superb. And last but not least, Niall, and then Niall's going to finish the session off.
Yeah, no, look, again, I think just, I suppose we're at the time of the year now where maybe everyone is kind of coming to the end of their season, and it probably is a very good time and chance for coaches to actually reflect themselves on how the season went, and maybe looking at things that they can put in place for next year. So just on that, then there is a book out there, Coaching Better Every Season. I'll get Stuart to share that with everybody that's on the call, but that does give a lot of tips and information around how us as coaches can keep improving each session or each season, depending on it. So I think this time of year it's very good for that, and to do it now, and then to be looking forward then to the new year that's not too far away. So look, in relation to tonight, I'd like to thank Colm and Louise for all their time and effort in preparation and planning in relation to tonight. Thank everybody for coming on the call. To Stuart working in the background and looking after all the IT end of it. The next session is all videos and support resources will be made available to all who are here tonight, and they'll be with you on or before Friday the 3rd of December. So any links, I know people had looked for 1 or 2 links there, so we will get those out to you as quickly as possible, and then the videos of both breakout rooms and the main room hopefully by the Friday the 3rd of December. If there is, we would appreciate your feedback and preparation for the next session. I suppose reflecting on your learning is key, and being able to bring your learning from paper to pitch in a practical way to your coaching practice. So I think that's key from anybody that's on any call or taking up new information in any way, is being able to bring it from the paper to the pitch in a practical way. And our next session is on Wednesday, the 8th of December. The ball's been thrown in at 7:30, and our topic is on player pathways. So I hope you enjoyed tonight, and we hopefully look forward to seeing you again on the 8th of December. Until then, stay safe.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.